So, how about some real authentication now? This is neat. This flow is neat, but how about we actually authenticate? So we saw that Firebase totally does authentication. I bet it's easy because other stuff with Firebase seems to be easy. Except on Mel's computer, which is possessed by a demon, a powerful demon. If anything, you should be flattered. Demons only try to mess with the good ones, right? Okay. Click on authentication over here in the left thing. Okay, authenticate and manage users from a variety of providers without server-side code. That sounds good. We don't do server-side. This is a client-side class. Up sign-in method. Hey, we've all got GitHub accounts. Let's click on GitHub here. It's not enabled. Let's enable it. Okay. To complete setup, add this authorization callback to your GitHub app configuration. We'll probably need to read a little documentation here from this link, but one thing I want to point out, everybody please pay attention. Don't not do this and then ask me why it didn't work. When you copy this thing out of here, use their little copy button. If you use your cursor to select it and copy, it will copy like a hidden character or something. Something will not work. It does not copy the right thing. Use the copy button they give you. Cool. Okay. Let's learn more. Firebase authentication, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Page pass, blah, blah, blah. Does it say anything specific about... Okay, here we go, GitHub. Before you begin, add Firebase to your JavaScript project. Yeah, we're way ahead of you. Okay, register your app as a developer application on GitHub and set your app's OAuth 2.0 client ID and client secret. Okay. Register your app. Looks like that's a link. If we click that, here we go. Register a new OAuth application. Application name, note header, something users will recognize and trust. In other words, if they try to sign in with GitHub, it's going to give them this little prompt from GitHub, and it's going to say, basically, do you trust this thing to have your authentication stuff? So put something in there that's going to make sense to the person seeing it. Note header's fine. Homepage URL, well, we don't know yet. Authorization callback URL. That's the thing we copied out of there. So let's paste that in there. So what's our URL? It's whatever your GitHub pages thing was. Let's put that in there. So in Firebase, on the GitHub page here, I clicked Learn More. And on the Learn More page, I scrolled down to GitHub. And then there was a thing for register your app. If you're not there, you should be able to go to your settings, your GitHub settings. Look for applications down here and do it that way. Authorize OAuth apps. And, no. That's not yours. Oh, come on. How do you get there? Developer settings. Got it. Okay, leave me alone. GitHub apps. Personal access tokens. OAuth apps. Yeah, OAuth apps. Okay. So, settings. Not the settings for the repository. Settings for your profile. Go to developer settings. I got it. Developer settings, new OAuth app. There you go. That's the page. Close this. Back in Fire. Okay, so we did it, right? There it is. Got your callback URL. Let's hit register application. So back in Firebase, let's save. Oh, client ID. Right. So back in, yeah. We need to get the client ID and client secret out of GitHub. So once we've registered it with GitHub, you need to copy client ID and client secret back into Firebase. If you have GitHub pages set up here, then you can just copy and paste out of there. If you don't, this isn't terribly important right now. You could make something up. That part doesn't matter so much. You could put a logo in here too. All right. So continue reading the documentation. Handle the sign-in flow with the Firebase SDK. Okay, so you need an instance of the GitHub provider object out of Firebase. Okay. So that's firebase.auth. So back in our base.js, we're going to need to import Firebase auth. Then we need new Firebase auth GitHub auth provider. Okay. So something like this. We'll put this above rebase create class, but below everything else. I'm of course not going to use var. I'm going to use const. And I'm not going to call it provider because we're going to have more than one authentication method here. So let's do GitHub provider. I'll call it. All right. Optional. Okay, we won't do that. Then you need to authenticate with that thing. Prompt your users to sign in. So you call firebase.auth.signin with popup. So we'll call sign in with popup from inside main somewhere, probably inside that handle auth method. But firebase.auth isn't going to be available there. So we should probably do a named export. How's that? We haven't done a named export before. Let's say export const auth equals app.auth. And let's say export const GitHub provider. So here's what we're doing. This line where we call firebase.auth that sign in with popup, that needs to happen inside main. But we're doing all our Firebase configuration inside base.js. So I need to be able to get to this thing from inside main. And I need to be able to get to this provider from inside main. So I'm exporting them from here. So I'm initializing my GitHub provider the way it says. And then I'm running app.auth like it says, but then I want to export both of those. So by saying export const and then the variable name, it's going to export them, but not as default. Now they're things I can put inside curly braces. So let's see that from the other side. Save that. And then inside app, sorry, not main, app, right? In addition to importing base from base, where is that? That is in main, isn't it? But authentication needs to happen here. So inside here, I'll do it before my components. I need to import auth like that. Whoops. Ah, my gosh. How to use a keyboard. From base. What about it? So we'll probably need to import that too. Maybe.
How do you know it's app?
Hang on. Let me find, where do I do this? Oh, inside sign in, right. What was the question?
How do you know it's app.com? Where is it? Yeah,
Good question. Instead of just firebase.auth. This has already got my config in there. I'm trying to remember if this was just something I figured out from the other not working. I think that's it. Because this is, this actually has my config in it. Otherwise, that's not going to be right.
Do we need to import the GitHub provider in app.js?
Let me see here. I've got another idea. Let's keep reading here. Let's see, how did I know to do this? Trying to find some documentation that actually does this so I can try to remember how I figured this out in the first place. Because that's part of what I'm trying to teach here is, like, you don't just know these things, you find them in the documentation. That's why we look up documentation so much. But now I can't remember where this is documented. Let's see. Firebase Authentication React. Some tutorials. This is a pretty new one. Yeah. Firebase has an event listener on auth state change that can check every single time the app loads to see if the user was already signed in last time. So that's a key here. So let's keep that in mind. But these things we found in here, this sign in and or not that. Where was it? Sign in with pop-up. So you can do sign in with redirect or sign in with pop-up. Sign in with pop-up seems appropriate. So when do we want to do that? When you click the sign in button, right? So inside our sign in component, instead of calling handle auth, let's call that. So let's actually import, let's import this stuff, not in app, but in sign in. So inside sign in, I will import auth and how about GitHub provider from base. Then I'm going to make a function inside here. Remember, even though sign in, the whole thing is a function, it's a stateless functional component, we could still totally put another function inside here. So I'm going to write one called authenticate. And it's going to call auth.signin with popup, like it says in the documentation. Now it needs a provider, right? I have to pass the provider in there. So it's either going to be GitHub provider or Google provider eventually. I could just put GitHub provider in here. But what if down here on my button, instead of on-click handle auth, I on-click authenticate. Authenticate. And I pass in GitHub provider there. That way the other button will do it differently. So I'm going to have to put an arrow function here. So the on-click is an arrow function that runs authenticate, passing in the GitHub provider that we imported. So then the other button will pass in the other provider. What does that do? Does that do anything? Sign in. Got an error. Sign in with pop-up failed. Expected 1 argument but got 0. Yep. So authenticate takes the provider as an argument. We pass the provider on to sign in with pop-up. Cool. Let's try it now. Click it. Uh-oh, I got a pop-up. Hey, authorize note herder. Note herder by dstruce wants to access your dstruce account. It'll get my email address read-only. Cool. Let's authorize it. All right, neat. That happened. How does app.js know? So that's what we needed out of this other article. So we did successfully sign in. But now app.js doesn't know that we've signed in. So Firebase does provide this thing on auth state change. And every time your Firebase authentication state changes, either from signed out to sign in or vice versa, that'll fire. So in app.js, following this example, inside our component did mount. So I'll put that under state here. Component did mount. This is already a real component, right? I want to run auth.onAuth state changed. So I need to make sure I import auth from base. So auth.onAuth state changed. And it looks like you pass in an arrow function that will receive a user as its argument. And then we can do something with that. So how about if that's there, if user, we want to call handle auth. Otherwise, we want to sign out, right?
So what's the user parameter here?
Hang on. This.sign out. So it's just the way on-auth state change works. Let's try to find actual documentation for this thing. Firebase on-auth state change. On-auth state change. On-auth state changed. So we can just see that the callback that you pass in here is going to receive a user object. So it's something that Firebase is going to give us automatically anytime authentication changes. So if there's a user there, we are signed in. If there's not, we're not. So if user, then we'll handle auth, else sign out. Let's see what that does. See if that just takes care of it all. Oh, there I am. Let's hit sign out. Okay, cool. But that just changed my state. That didn't actually sign out, did it? It didn't do anything with Firebase, right? So if I refresh the page, I'm still signed in. I never actually signed out of GitHub. Turns out that's super easy. Auth.signout will actually sign you out. Yeah? Right. Yeah, we'll fix that in just a second. Yeah, let's get this part to work. See if this works. Sign out. Okay, I sign out. If I refresh, still signed out. Can I sign back in? Yep. Signed in, signed out. But yeah, we hard-coded a UID, right? So up here in auth state change, we're being passed in a user. Let's see what that looks like. Console log user. I know it's 12. We'll quit real soon. Look at the console. Let's sign in. On auth state change should run. Yep, here we got a user or something. Gosh dang, that's a lot. Oh, but look, there's a UID. So user.uid seems to be a thing. I've got display name, Dave Struess, email. Okay, there's a lot of other crap there, but this user object does have like email, display name, and UID. So cool. So what if we just pass this user object along to handle off? And then we set UID to user.uid. So now let's look at my React Dev Tools. Let's look at app UID. Yep, there it is. Cool. Add GitHub Authentication.